Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Apologies for being a few minutes late. Both Yvette and I have construction going on in our homes, which is where we are today. So, work-life balance, work-life integration, we're going to make it work. I'm the CEO of Stability Partners. We are an organization focused on building positive, thriving work environments. I have Yvette here with me today. And Yvette is the founder of Unitive University. She's very focused on conflict intelligence, which I love, DEI, communication skills, helping people grow and thrive in their organizations. So we're on the same path. Thank you, Yvette, for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting me to your show.
Yeah. So I am super curious about your book, Conflict Intelligence Quotient. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, very briefly. My consulting firm is called Unitive Consulting, and I do have a Unitive University. But I'll talk a little bit more about that. But let me share a little bit about my book. Yes. In 2021, I published my book. I had it on my mind since 2014, and I realized as I was working with professionals somehow. I discovered that I had this methodology of helping people to become more conflict intelligence, if you may. I noticed that throughout the work that I was doing, a lot of people fear conflict. They didn't want to deal with the difficult conversations. Conflict is pretty much similar to public speaking. A lot of people don't want to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And I because of my career, because of the degree that I have in negotiation and conflict management, I realized that conflict is not all bad. It is the human side that if they don't know how to handle it properly, makes conflict to be very bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I made it my mission, and because I knew that this skill set was going to be a very useful skill for leaders to have in organizations. Back in the days before the pandemic started, these conflict resolution skills were called soft skills. So they were not really taken into consideration. And as we went through the pandemic and all of the changes that we have had, leaders are realizing that these human skills are very necessary. And there has been some research studies that a lot of CEOs have said that having conflict resolution skills, it's pivotal and it's very important in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, and because I wanted to make the difference in the world and create more peace, I went on and started writing my own book. I published the book. I wrote it all. And yes, I ended up being burnt out after finishing it up because I did it all by myself. It took me about a year and a half to do it, finding the designer and everything, because I pour all my passion and all my love into this book. And that is how the book came about.
Tell us what some of what's in the book. What is the conflict intelligence quotient?
Yes. Well, first of all, the book itself, it was also inspired by the quote of Albert Einstein. You cannot resolve a conflict from a level of consciousness that it was created. And that quote itself really stuck on me. And I said, let me figure out what he meant with that. And then on the other side, I also had my father, that he was an orphan at the age of 7, and he never had any formal education. But nevertheless, he was a great leader. It was one of those leaders that to this hour of the day, after my dad had passed away 25 years ago, if you were to talk to one of his employees, they literally cried because they said, I have never in my life to this date met a human being like your father. He was an amazing leader. He always cared for us more than making money for the business. And because of that, these employees were extremely loyal. They will take care of the business like if it was their own, because my dad really was a leader to follow. Mm-hmm. So with all that inspiration and with the quote of Albert Einstein, in my curiosity, I said, if these skills are what makes great leaders, let's create a methodology that I can bring into organizations, that I can help leaders and people in the organizations, because for me, everybody in the organization are leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I help, and how can I be of value to organizations to bring this forth? And that's how conflict intelligence was created. And basically what it is a methodology of helping individuals to realize, first of all, through awareness of how is it that they have ever dealt with conflict. If you go and ask yourself, how do I deal with conflict? You probably would not even pay attention to that ever in your life, right?
Yeah.
But then if you realize, many of us tend to be avoiders. Some of us tend to be aggressive and very, very, how do you say, aggressive and very win and loss.
Yeah.
Some of us will go into accommodation, that if you accommodate so much, sometimes you go to the side, to a point where accommodation can be very toxic for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's first helping them to realize what is your overall conflict resolution skills that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Then helping them to retool them through knowledge and skills, because conflict intelligence is not just one skill, it's a meta skill. It's several skills that you have to gain in order for it to you be able to feel comfortable with it. And then helping you to, what I say, retooling the brain, and then helping you with the behavioral transformation. Because what I'm intending with this book is for you to become conflict intelligence, to be a person that you do this automatically, that you have this as a muscle memory, just like if part of your own being. That's my intention. The other thing is also to shed light that a lot of organizations don't realize that when they have conflict in the workplace, it really affects the bottom line. But unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't realize that, because the atypical process of how to deal with conflicts is policies and procedures. And they believe that by sending these to the desk of the HR professionals, they're going to deal with it in the most appropriate way. And what they end up doing is that either they hire or fire people.
It's okay. Keep it going.
Thank you. So, in reality, people, leaders go in and say, well, I already have a conflict resolution people in my organization. Those are the HR people. Right. And they're well-meaning people. They're amazing, especially these past 3 years. HR has been our heroes. But the reality is that I actually went to an entire certificate program trying to figure it out, why HR was not utilizing all of the skill sets of alternative dispute resolution. Mm-hmm. And after 9 months and getting my certificate, I realized that they only gave me 30 minutes of conflict resolution in the entire 9 months of class that I went to. So I went in to change that, and I talked to the director, the director and the chair of the program, and I said, you know what, things need to shift. HR needs to evolve. HR needs to really bring back the human side of HR. Mm-hmm. And like I was mentioning, HR, the only thing that they do is policy and procedures that are dictated by legal counsel, right? Yeah. And obviously, legal counsel, they're very well paid. They're paid like the executives, and they don't want to lose their positions, right? So that's why they create a lot of fear. They create a lot of fear in organizations, that organizations are always going to be sued. Yeah. If you realize the statistics, I am a mediator inside the Equal Opportunity Commission as well. Okay. So I also do mediation for them. So the reality of things that a company will be sued all the time is not realistic. Right. But the reality that humans are humans, and humans need to be heard. Humans can resolve. If you empower them, they have self-determination to be able to resolve their own conflict. People have that innate power within them. They just need guidance. They just need support. They just need a way to how to, right? Yeah. And that's why, I'm fascinated with the field of work that I do, because I get the opportunity to experience humanity when I facilitate conversations, when I mediate for people. Mm-hmm. I realize that transformation that it happens because they probably never in their life ever have seen that they could have resolved conflict just through having
Right,
good
listening.
communication and
Yeah.
listening.
I want
Right?
to say to everyone listening, by all means, ask questions. If you have questions for Yvette, if you have a conflict going on and you want to ask her advice, or you have questions about your own conflict style. And yes, there is construction in the back. Some people are commenting on it. It is what it is. It's the world that we're in. I have construction going on in my house too. So just move past it and focus on Yvette. I know we can all do
And
that.
that is what is being conflict intelligence, right?
Right.
How is it that you can become it so that nothing outside of you will bother you that much that then you're not aroused and you don't get angry and you're not getting agitated because of everything else outside of you? That's what great leaders, the ones that we tend to admire, those are the great leaders that we see, that they're in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of chaos. They are still, they can lead, they have posture, they have composure, right? They can handle their own emotions and they can still lead, and people can trust them.
That's I feel like that kind of describes me, because my company, I'm the leader, and I definitely have a not let the chaos bother me, and see through it to the end and see the whole, despite the hole in the fog that we're moving towards. I definitely agree with everything you're saying, that, in my world of workplace bullying, same thing. I'm always talking about how HR is looking for harassment. And if it's not that, they tend to be very lost on what to do when things like conflict or bullying and the behavior that's legal and lawful and normal and human, they're kind of lost on what to do with that. So
yes, and let me tell you something, Catherine. Something that I know about you is that you went into this field of work because you're passionate, because you went through bullying. And let me tell you that I went through my own sets of bullying, micromanagement clicks, right in the midst, in the process that I'm also was studying my master's degree. Okay. And every time that was happening to me, I would say, I'm going through this because if I want to become an expert in this field, I have to personally be able to experience this, because if I were to read in a book that I was going to become sick because of the toxic environment, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have thought it was the environment, it was toxic, it was the environment, is toxicity, it is probably things that I'm dealing with stuff at home. I would have thought. But if you really put attention to your percentage that you spend in your day-to-day inside the workplace, our waking hour, we spend 80% of our waking hours inside the work. And even though that right now we're working in the computer, people ask me, Yvette, does conflict has either arise or diminish because people are working from home? And it's not true, because still, even though that they're working from home, even though that they're in their immediate house, they still have to go to these meetings. They still have to deal with the people that they don't like to work with. And the same visceral effects that people have when they're inside the organization or in the computer, they continue to have it. So it is not the conflict that we saw.
We can be higher conflict over a computer because something in our brain doesn't register that there's a person at the other end of our email. We have a question from Sarah. Great question. She says, well, here, let me share it. I whispered it says, so it takes practice to change our personality to adapt. What are the key tips to be consistent to change? As for sure, the traits of our personality would take time to change. So give us a couple tips in conflict resolution, or developing this conflict intelligence quotient.
Well, let me share with you that when I first started with my degree and building my consulting business, I was trying to aim to the consumer, to regular consumers, to regular people. But throughout the years, I realized that people were not interested in conflict resolution because people would only change for few reasons, and very strong reasons. Either because it's costing them money, it is too painful and they're losing relationships. Maybe they get inspired and they're like, let me think about that, and I'm a life learner and I'm gonna go and get it. And then there's knowledge available in order for them to really grasp if they're willing to do it. So if there is not some of those factors involved in the decision making of people, people are not interested in learning how to resolve conflict. Then on top of that, we live in an environment that conflict pays a lot of money. We see it all in TV. We see it in all over the news that what really pays the higher ratings are whenever there's drama, there's conflict, there's fights. We see it on the reality shows. We see it everywhere, right? Even right now with the famous song from Shakira, right? Where she's really putting the ex-husband down, everybody's loving that. So we don't have very good role models that are teaching us conflict resolution skills or peace building or civility in the workplace or at home. We don't have that. So we have built within us, unfortunately, behaviors that have been with us for a long, long time. So in order to really build your level of consciousness, in order to become conflict intelligence, it's not going to be with a 1 hour training, 2 hour training.
Right.
It's going to be with something that is more sustainable and where you're being taught experiential teachings in order to be able to gain this. And I'm pretty sure, Catherine, after so many years, actually you have been in the field more than I. You probably can attest to this, that sometimes companies hire us and say, hey, give a 1 hour training in conflict resolution. And sometimes I would refuse because I know that the return of investments for these organizations is not going to be so. And I want to make sure that I give return on investments, right? And it is not that it's a difficult thing, but rather that it's a situation in where is going to be this individual willing to go ahead and learn the skills that it takes in order to transform also behavioral wise, in order to become it, so that you can be a better leader, you can be a better coworker. And one of the things that I also find that really creates a lot of passion in me is that when I go and transform somebody in the workplace, and it has happened to me in the universities where I teach, that whenever I'm teaching all these things and I create transformational work with them, they realize that, what, I have become a better father or a better husband or a better wife or a better community member. Now I can get along better with my kids. So not only am I transforming the professional and the organizations that are serving the communities, but I'm also transforming that human being, that individual that is also going to go into the communities. So my hope is that within that, I'm also contributing to society.
Well, give us a couple tips. I see another question about advice for combating the people-pleasing tendencies, and Sarah had asked about key tips to help make change. So for everyone listening, what's like 2 things we could go and do right after you and I get off our talk here that could help them move down a path of adjusting the way they handle conflict?
Well, one of the things that I would suggest is to start listening, but not listening through your ears, listening through your whole body. Listening it's a very strong skill that if you know how to tap into listening, you would gain so much. They said that that's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen more, talk less.
Right.
While you listen to people, you realize what is either in it for it. Why is it that they're seeing things from a different perspective? You get to experience that it is not through holding on to your position that really helps you to negotiate or resolve conflict. It's about stepping into somebody else's shoes in order to realize how they're seeing life through their own lens, in order to identify how is it that they came out with that resolution or with that thought process or with that advice or with that information. And with that, it will help you to also understand. It will help the other person not to feel attacked, because many people, what they do whenever they go into conversations is that I don't agree with what you're saying. Immediately when you do that, the other individual will defend themselves, because it's a natural thing that happens in our
Right.
human brain. We
Right.
have to defend ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. And when we bring that, then we don't have space for the other person to listen to us.
Right.
We have to also help to create a psychological safe space in order to have these conversations. But it all starts, with one very good skill is listening skill for your whole body.
Yeah. Don't approach conflict as an argument that you need to defend. I think something I've learned is recognizing that when someone says something like I disagree, or you hurt my feelings, or any of the things that we say in relationships, whether at work or home, that they're not saying you're wrong, you're awful, they're just sharing. And to be able to really make that paradigm shift of, when someone says I feel hurt that, by something you did, to just say, wow, that's interesting, let me hear it out, versus, well, I didn't do that, or I didn't intend to, so that's your problem. We only have a couple minutes left, but we've got some other great questions. One is around power and position. How do you address power and position? Similar question, how to handle self-centered boss when you know the decision he's taking is wrong. So thoughts on the power differential, which certainly can, influence what happens in a conflict.
Well, it all depends, right? Because power is only it's relevant to sometimes we see power outside, right? And remember that power is how we see things in the aspects of how we're subscribing to people's ways of thinking. So a person can have power because they have a position, because they have money, or because they have other people that are supporting that individual, and that what creates power in the person, right? So it all depends on what type of power you're talking about. If it's power in between, the supervisor and the direct report, that is a very distinct power, right? Because in one way or another, the other person, it's in a position of power, right? It's a manager. But if you're talking about a coworker to coworker, what it means, and your perception of what's the power that the other person has. Maybe the other person has created more alliances with other people, right? And maybe that's how you perceive the power. But obviously, if you're going to be working to facilitate or to mediate something, you have to make sure that the two individuals are in a very equal power base. Otherwise, people are not going to open up, and they're not going to feel comfortable and become vulnerable in order to work in that type of environment, right? But if you're talking about power imbalance when it comes to you working with another individual, that's why it's very, very, very quick.
I think they're asking about a boss. So if I'm in conflict with my boss, that makes approaching that conflict a lot harder, because in the end, the boss could theoretically say what I say goes, or I don't care how you feel, or so that certainly the culture of the organization would play a role in that too. Are they very hierarchical or not? But everybody has different levels of power depending on whether, even if they're your peer, they might be more powerful than you. But if it's a boss, they do have power as dictated by the organization. So what's a tip for managing conflict in that scenario?
In that scenario, you have to learn how to become more assertive. And a lot of people, and women specifically, do not understand the word assertiveness and what it means. It doesn't mean that you have to become very male-ish or very aggressive in order to be assertive. If you find a good coach that can help you drill your assertiveness and practice your assertiveness, how to ask for what you need, right? And be able to feel comfortable in that aspect. That is the way that you can start creating a little bit of balance in the power balance. And another thing that a lot of people do not pay attention to is that being assertive, it's beneficial to your own health.
Right. Absolutely.
Because if you're not assertive and you're feeling constantly power imbalance, and you're feeling that you're being bullied, eventually that's going to lead you to become unhealthy. to not be able to wake up in the morning, to be able to go to work, to have high blood pressure. So being assertive really pays you back, because you're in a way protecting yourself and creating a psychological safe space in where no one else is creating for you.
Right.
Because we're in an era where, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and where everybody's saying that person needs to create a safe environment for me to talk. But you're also in the equation.
Right.
How can you take the time to educate yourself and be more assertive in order to ask for what you need, without having to fight, without having to lose composure, without having to lose your dignity, but be able to be more assertive? And that is part of the communication process that we need to teach. We need to work on.
And we do have to pop off, but Pam, Yvette's answer also speaks to your question around when someone has a big ego. So I would say that may fall under the workplace bullying category. And I think Yvette's point still works there too. You have to set boundaries. So no, sitting there and listening. Let me put the question so everybody knows who I'm talking to. She said, when someone has a big ego, does the suggestion of listening work, or is there something else? In my opinion, putting boundaries up, just sitting there and listening to them is not going to help them change, but to start setting boundaries. So for example, if you get a bit of a nasty email, you can respond by saying, I'm not going to respond to an email with this type of tone and voice, and just continue to put those boundaries up. But that's a whole nother conversation, Pam.
Well, part of putting boundaries is part of being assertive, right?
Right.
So part of putting those boundaries is part of being assertive. And then when is it, and then how can you also prepare yourself if when you put all those boundaries and you become assertive, but it is not working, then, either it is not the job for you, and maybe you will do better off in another job that really values you. And then you can learn from that experience, so that you know the questions to ask when you're going to be interviewing the companies. Because it is not about them interviewing you no more. It's also about you interviewing the company to make sure you ended up with another bully or another passive aggressive boss.
Actually, I have an old blog post about that, questions to ask in an interview if you're leaving a bullying situation and want to make sure there is not a bully in the next one. We do have to go, but Yvette can definitely pop in here. And Yvette, by all means, please respond to those who have questions. This video will be evergreen and sit on this page from now until the end of time. Thanks all for joining, and feel free to share if you thought this conversation was good. Thank you, Yvette, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for